Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name's Farron Savitz. I'm the Zero Waste Advocate with PennEnvironment. PennEnvironment is a statewide environmental nonprofit. We believe all Pennsylvanians deserve clean air, clean water, and a safe and livable environment. I'm the Zero Waste Advocate. I work on our Zero Waste campaign, which believes that we use a lot of stuff, and that stuff needs to go somewhere, and a lot of times it harms our environment. But before I get into that, I want to turn it over to Sarah Shea from Pennsylvania Resources Council, who has partnered with us on a recent report we released last May called Act 101 and Recycling in Pennsylvania, Past, Present, and Future, that charts a roadmap for how we're doing in the Keystone State on recycling and where we can go from here. So Sarah, do you want to take it from here?
Thanks, Farron. Good evening, everybody. Introduce myself. Sarah Leslie Shea, Deputy Director at the Pennsylvania Resources Council. For those of you not familiar with PRC, we are a statewide organization dedicated to the vision of a Pennsylvania where nothing is wasted. We're committed to waste reduction, diversion, education, and watershed protection. And we work with communities to reduce and diverse waste by providing direct services. So some of the things that we provide direct services include recycling collections for e-waste, tires, HHW. We facilitate glass recycling drop-off infrastructure, in particular in Allegheny County area. And zero waste is close to our hearts as well. We do have a zero waste services program that in particularly works with large scale events in Southwestern PA region, like the Pittsburgh Marathon and Arts Festival. And we're really excited at this point in 2022, from those programs alone, we've diverted 1.6 million pounds of material from our landfills, all with, that come from the general public and the public willing to kind of be participants in that system. We do a lot of education, as well as some work in watersheds in the southeastern PA. So just thanks everybody for wanting to spend an hour of their evening to learn a little bit about this report and our recommendations. I'm really excited to be here with Farron and with PennEnvironment. So I'm going to go over just a little history of Act 101, kind of, where it started, and then Farron's going to get into some of our recommendations. But for those of you maybe just, not familiar, won't go too much into detail, but, Act 101 is the Municipal Waste Planning, Recycling, and Waste Reduction Act. Mostly just referred to as Act 101. It was passed back in 1988 and created to meet several kind of parallel challenges that were facing Pennsylvania's waste management system at that time. In the early 80s, the U.S. enacted some amendments to the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and those amendments kind of set new standards for the management of solid waste, including the design and operation for landfills. And so with that, hundreds of landfills in PA were kind of set to close, and there was a lot of fear around insufficient landfill capacity. So to avoid a looming crisis, Act 101 established several complementary programs, including a very highly progressive at that time strategy to build a robust recycling infrastructure across PA. Some of the key provisions that came out of Act 101 was requiring waste management planning at the county level. It mandated recycling programs in large population municipalities across the Commonwealth. It implemented a $2 per ton tipping fee on all waste disposed at landfills. It's still in effect today. And that money goes into the recycling fund. The grant categories were created to support county and municipal recycling, education, infrastructure, and planning grants, and those funds are coming from that recycling fund. So it was implemented to tackle the many problems caused by kind of a lack of management of waste, and really position, us to better reduce our waste here in Pennsylvania. There were four main goals that the act looked to touch on. One was setting a deadline that at least 25% of all municipal waste and recycling generated per capita in this Commonwealth on January 1st, 1997 to be recycled. So that kind of puts in perspective how long ago. I think, when we think of 1988 and that the deadline was 1997, and that's now, 25 years in the past. Another main goal that it set was the weight or the volume of municipal waste generated per capita in the Commonwealth in 1997 should be less than the weight or the volume of the waste when the act was enacted back in 1988. They wanted each person living or working in the Commonwealth to be taught the economic, the environmental, as well as the energy value of waste and recycling and waste reduction. And then that the Commonwealth itself should procure and use products and materials with recycled content and procure use of materials that are recyclable. Those are really valuable. So while, the act led to many important changes across the state, the new analysis, that we've done and many other folks have done truly over the course of the years has kind of shown that we're falling short, on these 4 goals. That efforts to educate Pennsylvanians about recycling has fallen short due to budget cuts, due to raids to the recycling fund, that waste generation has grown and not been reduced, that the Commonwealth is not necessarily really using and procuring recycling products to the extent that it could be, and that we're really living uncertain of the overall state recycling rate due to the way data is collected. Act 101 was considered groundbreaking, and it was, more than 30 years ago. It really established Pennsylvania with one of the most extensive recycling programs in the country at that time. But we know at 2022, we've fallen behind on being that leader in waste and recycling. And I think of it as if you Google the first mobile phone in 1988 and you look at it, at that time, it was cutting edge. It was amazing. You could, carry this big block of cheese with you. But if you look at what we have today and you compare it to the Apple 13 of today, the model from 88 really isn't equipped to meet our needs. And I think it just parallels to the law, that we currently have. We're aware, much more aware of how the lack of a circular economy, is contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. We know the value of recycling and waste stream management and what it's done for the economics. Penn Recycling Market Center put out not that many years ago showing 66,000 direct jobs, based from the recycling industry. So there's benefits to recycling, but we're seeing things like recycling rates dropping. We're continuing to deal with an abundance of single-use plastics and even lack of disposal options for basic recyclables across the Commonwealth. I am based out of our Pittsburgh office, and just over the past couple of years, we've seen municipalities have to halt the curbside collection of glass, completely very valuable recyclable material. And just, we know that that shouldn't be happening and occurring in 2022. And we know that we can do better, in PA. And that's really what this report strives to do. So that was my little recap kind of on the background. And we're just really excited to kind of move towards some of these goals and recommendations put out in the report. And I'll hand it back to Farron to kind of go through those. Thanks.
Sure thing. Thanks, Sarah. I always love learning about the history of this stuff, since it's so wild how things have changed in the past few decades, but how a lot of our systems have stayed the same through that time. But again, my name is Farron Savitz. I'm the Zero Waste Advocate with the PennEnvironment Research and Policy Center. And moving Pennsylvania towards a zero waste future has always been one of PennEnvironment's top priorities. In the past few years, we've introduced a Zero Waste PA package of bills in the state legislature to target different parts of our waste system. Last year, we participated in a lawsuit against the General Assembly for illegally preempting our cities and towns from implementing local ordinances to rein in the effects of single-use plastic pollution. And since 2019, PennEnvironment has worked with local leaders to pass these ordinances, tackling single-use plastic bags, polystyrene containers, and they now cover over 16% of the state's population. And we do all this because, as Sarah explained, in Pennsylvania, like in all of America, we really have a stuff problem. We're encouraged to make, to use, and toss at the greatest possible speed. And so much of what we toss are items that we use once. Products like a plastic bag, polystyrene food containers, straws, bottles, or they're items that we use every day to keep our lives running, like cell phones, computers, and other electronics. But they all share one thing in common. When we're done with them, there aren't many easy, affordable, or accessible options to get rid of them besides just throwing them away. The problem is there is no away when it comes with our waste, whether it ends up in a landfill, in an incinerator, if it's recycled, or even littered in our parks or waterways. it has an impact on our environment and on our health long after we're done with it. And the report we're discussing tonight is meant to address this growing waste crisis, and it provides solutions to help end our addiction to single-use plastics, to help tackle the largest and fastest growing sources of waste, like our organic waste or electronic waste, and to make sure it's never cheaper to throw something away than it is to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And although the solutions we're discussing now aren't sort of a be-all, end-all, they provide a good roadmap, I like to think of it, for approaching the problems facing us. So, like we've already discussed, when it was passed in 1988, Act 101 was possibly the strongest recycling law in any state in the country. But in the past few decades, it's fallen a little bit behind because we didn't have smartphones or tablets in the 1980s. Televisions look wildly different, and many parts of our waste stream have ballooned significantly. In 1980, for example, Pennsylvanians generated around 340,000 tons of plastic waste. In 2018, that had more than tripled to 1.4 million tons. And the recycling rate for plastic in 2018 was less than 10%. So this report has 15 crucial recommendations to make Pennsylvania a leader once again in the fight to reduce our solid waste. Recommendations like banning certain items from landfills, increasing public education, and providing grant funding for new innovations. I don't have time to go through all of them, but if you'd like to see them, I recommend checking out the full report, which I'll link again in the chat for everyone to see. But I want to highlight 5 of the recommendations that are especially crucial in addressing the problems we've laid out. The first one, we need more mandatory curbside collection programs. Under Act 101, only our larger municipalities have to follow the provisions set forth under Act 101. That covers a little under 70% of our population, and our smaller municipalities that have voluntary programs don't need to follow the same set standards. So expanding the requirements of Act 101 so that all municipalities provide more uniform recycling services, especially with curbside collection, would make it easier for all Pennsylvanians to recycle their waste, regardless of where they are and where they live. 2, we need to ensure that common items we use every day can be recycled easily and effectively. That means creating a larger standardized set of materials, including glass, aluminum, steel, paper, cardboard, recyclable plastics, and other items that can be collected for recycling everywhere. Right now, municipalities only need to collect 3 out of a list of 8 materials. That means what can and can't be recycled varies town to town, borough to borough, and city to city. It creates confusion for residents. It can create inequalities in the contracts with waste haulers, and essentially makes the system different where you live in the state. So making sure that every common item we use every day has a sustainable way of dealing with it at the end of its life is crucial for making sure our recycling programs function adequately and sustainably. 3, we need to expand access to disposal options for the largest part of our waste stream, organics, and the fastest growing e-waste. This means developing, promoting, and expanding curbside composting and e-waste recycling programs across Pennsylvania so these items don't end up in a landfill. Only one type of organic waste is mentioned in Act 101, and that's leaves. But we know that there are a lot more types of organic waste out there that we create, from food scraps to other types of yard waste. We create a lot of these. They're the biggest single part of our waste stream. And they're also one of the biggest sources of methane in our landfills. So figuring out a way to divert organic waste from landfills is important to fixing some of our waste problems. And we have composting, which is a great solution. It's been used not just around the country, but in Pennsylvania itself for reducing our organic waste and turning it into something useful afterwards. Making sure that composting programs are accessible to Pennsylvanians everywhere, making sure that there are more curbside composting programs in the state is a great way to do that. And making sure there are funds available for their programs is a big step towards getting rid of our organic waste out of the landfills. With electronic waste, it's similar. E-waste, as we like to call it, has limited access to collection, and the recycling is very limited for e-waste. Expanding the ability for Pennsylvanians anywhere to be able to just drop off their electronics so that they can be sustainably disposed of is crucial. That way they don't end up in landfills. That way the toxins that can be in them don't end up in our landfills or leaching into our environment. And Right now, it's pretty costly for people to drop off their electronics at e-waste centers. And in fact, state representatives Tracy Pennyquick and Mike Zabel are working on legislation right now to decrease the cost of e-waste recycling for Pennsylvanians, to lower that barrier for proper disposal, to put some of the burden back on the producers of the waste rather than normal Pennsylvanians, to make it easier for us to get rid of it. 4, we need producers to pay for the waste we create. We need funding for our recycling programs. Technically, these are multiple recommendations, so I'm cheating a bit by including them together, but they're related and both incredibly important. This includes passing bottle deposit bill and producer responsibility laws so that the buck for our waste doesn't stop with ordinary consumers. And that's at the state level, but it can also be at the federal level, where having a national bottle deposit or national producer responsibility laws would go a long way towards helping our waste systems, because we need everyone, including our corporations, to do their part. The first bottle bills were passed before Act 101 was, so we have decades of evidence to show that they're incredibly effective. Not only are the recycling rates for beverage containers highest in states with deposits, but the overall recycling rate for all materials sees a significant jump. Because if we tackle the individual parts of our waste stream, it has wider downstream benefits for the other materials as well. These policies also help to fund new recycling programs, and many of the funding mechanisms for recycling in Pennsylvania haven't been updated in decades. So despite changes in costs and the markets for materials, the funding for the programs hasn't risen to go with them. But producer responsibility, bottle bills can both provide some funds to help sustain recycling programs or programs that can make recycling cheaper and more efficient. And on top of that, in order for our municipalities to maintain recycling, especially curbside collection, which can be costly, changes need to be made to ensure that they have the funds to do so. And finally, our 5th recommendation, we have to cut out single-use plastics that are plaguing our planet. Items like retail bags, polystyrene foam, straws, and other single-use plastics, they're used for just a few minutes, but will remain in a landfill or environment for hundreds of years, if not longer. We need to get rid of them once and for all by passing bans and other restrictions at the local and state level. Many single-use plastics are not currently recyclable, or they're not easy to recycle, but they have easy reusable alternatives that we can swap them out for. So getting rid of them is a common sense solution that will reduce contamination at recycling facilities, reduce our waste, and help keep our environment clean all at once. When we released this report in May, 6 municipalities in Pennsylvania had already taken this step. Since then, that number has doubled to 12, with Tredyffrin Township banning plastic bags and polystyrene containers this past Monday. So there's been a lot of action in this area. Saw some folks from Tredyffrin in the chat earlier. So it's time for the rest of the state to join them and take this action too. And that's because there isn't really a silver bullet solution for our waste crisis. It requires a concerted effort targeting every step of the process, from before products are made to when they reach consumers to after they get thrown away, to really make a difference. These recommendations are just part of that effort. And this report, Act 101 and Recycling in Pennsylvania, provides a roadmap for our elected leaders, our regulatory agencies, and the companies dealing with our waste, and for the general public to use those tools, to access them, and attack the problem from every angle, so that we can make this long-lasting and substantial change. With that, I've been talking for a while. I see a bunch of questions coming into the Q&A box, so I think we should turn it over to Q&A. Give me 1 second to check out what is happening. And just a reminder for everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat, because I'll be looking there to see where the questions are. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the older ones. So we have a question. Sarah, this one might be best for you. How is glass recycling being handled across the state, especially since some communities have stopped collecting glass for recycling? And what about colored versus clear glass?
Great question. It varies completely across the state. In I think it was 2018, 2019, the MRF, Waste Management MRF here in southwestern PA removed stopped collecting glass from a lot of curbside municipalities, took it out. Their concern was, and I think I saw some people on the chat kind of bring up this point, the issues with single stream, and the original ideas was making it convenient for everybody, but unfortunately mixing everything together and then trying to, unscramble that egg back out, is difficult. There are investments we know that MRFs can make that are expensive, but can to help, pull out a cleaner stream, of glass, but it really varies across the state. I mean, there are, haulers still accepting it. There are a lot of public drop-offs that are, creating a clean stream of glass. We were just speaking to folks in that Pennsylvania is a really unique state for glass. We have 2 facilities on both sides of the state that do a lot of, kind of cleaning and pre-sorting of the glass. And then we have bottle makers too, as well, all within, a certain distance. And so for us in the state of PA to not be collecting and recycling glass is kind of crazy. I know there's a lot more, logistics to that, but I would really look for, if your region has source separated glass, and you have the capacity to bring it to a source separated location, that is extremely valuable. If your curbside collection still takes it, we've seen capped glass in Mount Pleasant. We've seen the glass that comes to them from single stream. It is definitely not clean. It is, very messy, but they are able to, remove and get glass out of that. So, I wouldn't tell you if your curbside is your only option to not do that. And then obviously there's going to be places that have no option. And that's where, that's where the gaps are. That's where we're kind of lacking here in PA is that, Farron, you made a comment of even the mandated municipalities that originally we only, it was only required for 3 of those materials to be chosen. And that leaves a huge gap in other items that are very valuable. So that was kind of a general answer. If you have more specific, I'm happy to jump in, but Farron, if you have anything else to add to that.
I actually think you covered it perfectly. I don't have anything to add on that point, except I think one way in glass recycling that we could benefit the state is one of those recommendations we have, which is the bottle deposit bill. Because if we're collecting beverage containers, especially glass ones, which can be reused by companies, again, for bottling new beverages, we get them out of the waste stream, and then it negates some of that need for glass recycling. So that would certainly be a benefit on that front. Checking again. Let's see. We have a question. What is being done to accommodate for China and others no longer attempting recycling? And that's in reference to the policy that went in, was it 2018, where China stopped accepting recyclables from the United States? Sarah, do you want to take a crack at that one as well?
Yeah, and the National Sword, I think what we saw immediately after in the focus on trying to actually get cleaner streams in single stream was a big result in that. I know the education, it used to be like, if you're not sure, just throw it in your bin. We're going to figure it out because, we'll sort it out. And, if it's not a perfectly clean stream, we're going to still send it to China or somebody else is going to accept it. And when those outlets were shut down, we saw a lot more of, haulers and municipalities really trying to educate folks with the complicated, especially when it comes to plastics, just the complicated nature of what you can put in your bin so that we can get clean streams of material with the systems that we currently have. And so really drilling down to, we want, 1s and 2s and bottles and jugs and jars, and that's it, no clamshells, no. And obviously one of the hard things about recycling is that it varies. So, what my municipality takes might be different from what a municipality right next door to us takes. Not necessarily that relates to what's actually able to be recycled, but what's the contract, what is that hauler, able to process. So I think some of the initial things we saw was that change to be, trying to find, which really is what we should be. We do want, in recycling, it's a commodity. We want clean streams of material. That's valuable. That's, what we want to have. So, that was valuable. But I have heard, once again, I'm located in southwestern PA, so I have a little bit more knowledge base on this area. I do know that the local MRF, all of their plastic that they're collecting is markets in the United States. They are now no longer sending, they have no outside of the United States markets. So there is availability and demand for material within the United States. But I think they're really trying to narrow down and be more specific on what is actually acceptable in that, bin. What should you be putting? What should we be focusing on? And I think it's most confusing when it comes to plastics. I think, the metals, those are, easier, and the messages kind of stay the same. It's more of that plastics message that changed a little bit. And then the glass, I mean, that was a big reason, because some of the MRFs weren't set up to really pull out the glass appropriately. The glass was getting in the paper bales, and so the paper bales weren't, as high a quality, and then that was harder to find a downstream market. So that's wherein locally here to the Pittsburgh area, that a lot of municipalities had to pull glass out of their curbside because the hauler required it.
Yeah, and certainly one of the things that it's resulted in is putting a lot of the responsibility for knowing how to deal with your recyclables and really educating yourself on normal Pennsylvanians. Like, there's a lot of responsibility for people to figure out what's recyclable in their municipalities, what you were saying about knowing what your hauler does and doesn't recycle. And that can be confusing for a lot of people, especially if, one place in your county has recycling set up one way, and then another municipality has it set up a different way. So theoretically, you could move just a few blocks and what can and can't be recycled changes. So certainly that change in policy has shed a light on why we need to update Act 101 and why we need these more a more standardized system everywhere in Pennsylvania. And just a reminder for everyone, please put questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat. We're monitoring the Q&A box for all the questions. I see some questions coming through the chat, so if you could put those in the Q&A. I saw another question if the webinar is going to be recorded. It is being recorded. The Facebook live stream will be up on our Facebook page afterwards. So if you showed up late, you can catch up on what you missed. If you want to go back and listen to what was being said at the beginning, if you want to hear more about the recommendations or the history of Act 101, that will all be available for watching later on. But returning to the questions, I feel like this one is, I feel like single stream recycling ends up causing most materials to become unrecyclable. Is a return to separated recycling even in consideration? And I'll toss it to you in a second, Sarah, but I think one important thing with in answer to this is specialized recycling is certainly something we need more of to help with the contamination in single stream. Because we have things like electronics, like plastic, like organics that aren't always recyclable. And a lot of times with single stream, people might think they're recyclable. If they don't know all the specific requirements, they might include them with their recycling. We like to call it wish cycling. And having ways to deal with these types of waste specifically, either we've been talking a lot about bottle deposit programs because I really like bottle deposit programs, but having a statewide bottle deposit program in Pennsylvania, having more access to e-waste recycling throughout the state, having curbside composting throughout the state. We're seeing more smaller pilot programs in some municipalities, but more access to that curbside composting would be great to help get these items out of the waste stream to make our single stream recycling more effective. But Sarah, I'm sure you have more to add on that front.
Yeah, I think it's going to be rare that we'll see haulers who have invested in single stream MRFs to go back to dual stream or source separated. I think that's not as likely. I know there are throughout the state, some solid waste authorities and municipalities that do have source separated collection and that have stuck with it. And I think I saw somebody put something about Center County, and I know that the Center County does source separate their material, and there's value. I think the more likelihood would be looking towards, are MRFs going to invest in equipment to make the systems better for the way that it's set up now. But I agree. I think we all thought well, it'll make everybody be able to recycle more because it's easy for the resident. But I think it does make it more likely that since everything goes in one bin, people are unsure about what can go in and end up putting more things in that aren't acceptable and are just these kind of simple everyday products. But there's just going back to that the packaging, that there's just so many different types, and that having a stream or a MRF that's able to manage all the different types of plastic packaging that we have. I know there's lots of pilot programs here and there, but is it really feasible to go across the state on some of those things? But I don't see it moving backwards very much. I think what we have seen, and this will be the last, so I won't keep rambling on. What one surprise was with the PRC did work to with municipalities in Allegheny County to implement glass recycling, so that infrastructure, so that there would be drop-offs. And one of the things, now we're not hitting all of the population, but we are seeing people willing to do that. And so does it make sense to increase that kinds of infrastructure for those materials that to get a cleaner stream of material? Is that of value? And we are seeing that people are willing to do it, but it's only accessible in certain areas. So that needs to be expanded.
And I actually have a question following up on that. Because a lot of people, because they think because of wish cycling or contamination, that when they put stuff in the recycling, it's not actually getting recycled, or that because of single stream recycling isn't really working. But I think it's important to note that recycling sort of as a system does work and is valuable. So do you want to touch upon where single stream is valuable and how it's functioning currently, and then maybe a bit how we can improve it further? Because I know you've talked a bit about that, but I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, recycling is definitely working, and we were just actually over at the materials recovery facility and seeing the bales that are coming out. Especially you look at aluminum cans, and I have some lovely neighbors. Hey, they're not here right now, but they'll be back. That's what I get for doing the webinar outside. So, the number one plastics, number two plastics, that, there's key commodities that single stream is sorting out well. And I think as we're seeing a reduction too in the use of plastic bags to collect recyclables, especially in this region, that's continuing to support a cleaner stream of materials going through the MRFs. And so I think the education is key, and it's not that it's necessarily, it falls on the general public, it's their job. But part of it, that helps if what's going in is, cleaner, and if we can get a clear understanding of what's acceptable, and if it's, more standard across an area, that makes it simpler for folks. But that's the first step. And then once again, continuing to see MRF facilities invest in equipment to continue to sort, to create cleaner streams. But it is definitely, where I was looking at the DEP's report that they put out, and I mean, they were saying, I think it was like in a course of 3 years, how many 39 million metric tons of CO2 was avoided because of recycling. I mean, it's it's working well, but there's so much more room for growth in the state. And there's a lot of, accessibility issues in different areas. Maybe if you're in a populous region, you have options, but you go out, PRC runs the DEP recycling hotline, and we get calls from counties for folks. E-waste is a huge one, and it's like they have maybe one option in their county. And how many miles are you going to drive, like, to be able to dispose of those types of things? So hope that helps.
Yeah. And I saw someone put in the chat that they couldn't see the Q&A. We can see the Q&A. That's where I'm reading the questions from. So definitely keep putting your questions there, because that's how I'll see them. We're trying to get to as many as we can in the time we have. This is one that I want to take a stab at. It's industry has historically held the consumer responsible for recycling, and much of the small amount that consumers actually do recycle, maybe doesn't get recycled. But what are we doing to correct this, to hold manufacturers responsible for the life cycle of materials? And one of our key recommendations is producer responsibility. It's a type of policy that puts the burden for dealing with the waste on the producers rather than us, the consumers. So we'd love to see producer responsibility here in Pennsylvania, a statewide law. We're seeing more statewide producer responsibility laws elsewhere in the country. Notably, I believe Maine passed one this past year, but it's things like we've seen them before with batteries or paint, where the producers of these waste have to pay into systems so that there is functional recycling for these hard to recycle materials, and expanding producer responsibility. So it includes things like plastic packaging that Sarah, you were just talking about, or things like rugs and textiles, bulky waste, even electronics. Bottle deposits are sort of a form of producer responsibility. So making sure that these people who create these hard to recycle forms of waste are making it so that we can actually fund programs to get rid of them. Because it shouldn't be on a consumer to pay a $200 fee to recycle their old electronics. Like, that's not feasible for a lot of people, on top of driving to an e-waste facility. But if the producers of electronic waste pay into the system so that it subsidizes the cost for our consumers, in part with what people pay, then that'll definitely help make it easier for all of us to recycle our electronic waste. And same with carpeting, same with paint and batteries, plastic packaging, all of this. So producer responsibility is definitely the answer there. Sarah, I don't know if you have more to add there.
No, I think you answered that well. And I think looking at, what the state has tried with the CDRA and making steps, and I know there's lots of, it's not perfect, and they're looking to make improvements to it, but to try and start on that path of, let's, hold those who are producing the material accountable, and that's a valuable tool.
There's a question in the Q&A. Is the recycling portion of the tipping fee still $2, same as it was in 1988? Yes, it is. That's one of our recommendations, and also part of our zero waste PA package is raising that tipping fee, because $2 in 1988 is not the same as $2 in 2022. And if we're required to pay more, or if haulers are required to pay more at landfills on that tipping fee, to go into our recycling programs, we'll better be able to fund our recycling. Because many of our smaller municipalities, one of the barriers towards having a good curbside recycling program is the cost. It can be expensive to run and maintain. So making sure that we have that tipping fee go up so that we have more funding for recycling is crucial to getting some of these other recommendations to work. Sarah, do you want to build onto that?
No, I thought that good
Sure.
answer.
One of the solutions to the plastic dilemma must be to create truly biodegradable and or compostable plastic. What's happening on this front? I can dive into that first, but one of the things we see with plastic that's labeled biodegradable or compostable is that it requires industrial scale composting to actually break down. Like, if you put it in your backyard compost, it's going to stay plastic. If you put it in many municipal composting, it's going to stay plastic. So certainly those would be more viable solutions if there's more access to industrial scale composting, but also having plastic that is truly compostable in like a backyard compost setting or in smaller municipal plots would go a long way. There are a lot of prototypes, things being developed, but on that front, there's still a long way to go. So in terms of sustainable solutions to plastic, biodegradable and compostable options aren't the best way to go. Certainly reusable options are what you want to look to because they're not single use. Even with biodegradable and compostable plastics, you still have to get rid of them at the end of their life. But with a reusable option, you can use it over and over again. So you're not creating a new one every time you need a product. You don't have to get rid of it every time you use it. And so that's the way forward with those. I'd say go with your reusable alternatives. Can you address the energy use by recycling? Sarah, I'm going to kick this to you.
So just as far as the savings, energy savings in recycling, I mean, I think, it's incredibly valuable. And I could look at, I have some, how much electricity was saved, by over the course of 3 years. They said like 6.7 million homes worth of electricity was saved via the energy saved by recycling. And it's, just boiling it down to common sense. If we're, especially not to harp back on glass, but, if it's infinitely recyclable material, and especially in the state of Pennsylvania, there is end markets and, within you can collect it, you can clean it, and then you can look to process it back into bottles within, this a true circular economy, local model. There's no way that, creating from, glass from the virgin material makes, any sense whatsoever. Obviously, reuse is, would be the best method, but as a second recycling, essential aluminum, cardboard, there's just, such a huge value in it because you're not accessing, virgin material. And it even goes back to, so many of the ways that I think we participate in, the recycling system and the reuse and purchasing secondhand and all of those ways to just really reduce that initial input of energy to create, new and virgin products, especially like Farron said, when you're talking about those single use ones, it's not just necessarily something maybe you're going to use for a while, but, we do a lot of events and we see a lot of the plastic cup that goes from the vendor and is done by the time they get to the container, in the course of 2 seconds. And that's when it's a little painful to watch.
I'm seeing a lot of questions about where to find information, either on source separated recycling in their area, on glass recycling, e-waste recycling. So besides following your local environmental groups like PennEnvironment or PRC, who we often post on social media about events for specialized recycling and stuff, Sarah, where would you recommend people go to get that information for stuff near them?
So, I mean, I would definitely recommend, and I can put the number in the chat. Folks can call the PADEP recycling hotline. It's manned all during the week. You will get a phone call back within usually 24 hours, and PRC maintains a database of as up to date as we can information on across the Commonwealth recycling options for folks, as well as just even your county recycling coordinator, getting in touch with them, because it does vary so much municipality, county to county on what's available, what's offered, what might be free, what might, be a charge model. Some municipalities might have curbside collection of, e-waste based on their contracts. And so it varies so greatly. So that's a great resource. to call and to get some, information that's more specific. And then obviously, always your local municipality, they're going to know it up to date, especially the information that will go in your curbside. That's helpful.
Yeah. And I'm also seeing a few questions about how to get some of these recommendations done in either in your municipality or in the state at large. I'll tackle this to start, but for some of these, like curbside composting or a plastic bag ban, or the more municipal level stuff, reach out to your elected officials, your local elected officials. They love to hear from constituents all the time. If you make your voice heard, you can have a huge impact. So reach out, start a conversation with them, say you're interested in getting composting in your borough, your township, your city. And that can go a long way towards getting it to happen for where you live. For the statewide stuff, it's pretty similar too. Reach out to your state representative or your state senator. We have our zero waste PA package of bills, which has a lot of these solutions like producer responsibility, bottle deposit, a statewide plastic bag ban, increasing the tipping fee. So if you reach out to your state rep or state senator and ask them to support waste reduction legislation, then it can go a long way to getting it to happen. But if you also just make your voice heard, it can help build that support, get your friends and family to make their voices heard, to build that support even further. Some of these solutions may not happen this year. It might take a couple years to get them to happen, but using your voice is certainly an important way to make an impact. And I'll be sharing an action in just a few minutes to along those lines, I should say. Let's see. I know we have just a few minutes left, so I'm scanning the Q&A here to see if we have other frequently asked questions. Is it true that paper that gets wet can't be recycled, Sarah?
No, the MRFs are able to, if it's outside in your bin or it's collected, that's not, going to be an issue. The cleanest stream of paper, I know some locations have, mixed paper bins that you can bring to. Source separated material is always going to be the best. But, mixed paper in your curbside recycling bin, if it gets wet, it's, not going to be the end of the world. They'll be able to manage it.
And then can you talk a bit about battery recycling? Someone who says they're in the Pittsburgh area, but not in the city where there is a reasonably priced option for residents.
So I do know in the Allegheny County, there is a company called Batteries Plus, and they do take all kinds of both alkaline, lithium ion, all types of batteries, and they are kind of multiple locations throughout Allegheny County. So I would look to see, it's a pretty affordable option for you. And I believe rechargeables would be free, and the alkalines are very affordable price. There is a place that I am happy to share my email, my contact information. So if anybody does have other questions outside of this, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah. All right. So we have just a few minutes left. And you just touched on one of the things I wanted to share. So because we had a lot of questions, we certainly can't get to all of them, but I'm going to put my email in the chat. Sarah will put her email in the chat, and you can always reach out to us if you have further questions based on this webinar. The recording will be up on our Facebook page and our website, so you can go back and rewatch it if you want. We'll also try and respond to some people who left questions in the Q&A that we didn't get to. Let's see. I do have a few things that I'd like to put in the chat. So I put them in the chat earlier, but I want to grab them again so that people can see them. So the first thing is a link to the report we did with Pennsylvania Resources Council. That's what we've been talking about today. And it has the background on Act 101. some of the history, and also all 15 recommendations for what we can do at each level, both as individuals, as municipalities, counties, states, to help this problem. There's also a quick action that you can take to support producer responsibility in Pennsylvania. So producer responsibility is one of the key recommendations we're talking about. It's a way to help get those who really create the waste to help fund the systems to deal with it. So it's a quick action to ask your state representative to support producer responsibility legislation. Then the last thing is to sign up for PennEnvironment's Mobile Action Network. And I included a phone number and something you can text, but it's a great system to stay in touch with us so that you can get updates on upcoming events, petitions, and actions on waste and other issues, like this webinar tonight, or the report released last May. And let me also put my email in the chat. If you have questions to follow up on, feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to answer them. But with that, as we run out of time, I wanted to thank all of you for coming out tonight. It's a Wednesday, so it's great that you all made it here. We know everyone's busy, but oh, not seeing the info in the chat. Okay.
Anybody able to see my information that I shared in the chat or not?
Oh, Farron, you shared to hosts and panelists. Make sure you share to everyone.
And
Can
I'm not
you-
sure if I
see-
was able
Are you-
to share with everyone. If there was a way I can do that, let me know.
Just next to the word "to," I think.
Flora, could you enable it to let us send it to everyone? It's changed so we can only send it to hosts and panelists.
Oh, interesting. I'm sorry about that. I'll just send it to everyone instead.
Awesome, perfect.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that. So those are the links there that Flora has shared for everyone. That first one is the report. The second one is to the producer responsibility petition. The third is for the Mobile Action Network. And then the information from Sarah about Pennsylvania Resources Council. But again, thank you all for coming out tonight. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. The recording will be available on Facebook and our website. Yes, we will be following up from the webinar with these links and what people can do to take action. And then there's the DEP recycling hotline. You can call that to get more information about recycling in your area. Sarah, would you like to close us out with any final remarks?
Just thank you. It's awesome to see so many people interested to come online and learn, and want to answer questions about recycling. And that's PRC is very much here for like that resource. So please, if you do have questions, reach out to us. We're happy to try to, help you find outlets for your materials. And thanks, Farron, for, pulling us all together.
Yeah, thank you for coming out tonight. You shared a lot of good information. I certainly learned more about recycling. But again, thank you all and have a good rest of your night.